So we're gonna start off with Khabib Nurmagomedov. His biggest accomplishment by far, obviously, is that he was a UFC lightweight champion. He defended the belt 3 times against elite killers of the UFC's lightweight division. And it's important to mention too that when Khabib was at the top of the lightweight division, that's when the lightweight division was the clear-cut, most competitive, deepest, shark-infested division in all of MMA. Another crazy accomplishment out of Khabib's UFC career is one of the most unheard of things we've ever seen is that he went 13-0 in his UFC career. And when we're looking at his 13-0 undefeated UFC record, with that he had 7 finishes and 6 decisions, so he had a 54% finish rate. He was the most dominant fighter we have ever seen in MMA history. Like, a lot of people talk about the GOAT conversation and they say John Jones, and that is 100% true. I'm backing that all day. But when we're talking about the most dominant fighter we have ever seen in mixed martial arts history, it's not even close. It is Khabib Nurmagomedov. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I ask you, when did you see Khabib get hurt in a fight? When was he in trouble in an MMA fight? Like, I'm actually curious what you're gonna say. You're gonna say Michael Johnson?
This is #1 bullshit.
The one punch he landed on Khabib. Khabib just took a slight step to the side and everyone thought he was wobbled. Joe Rogan was saying he was badly hurt. No, he wasn't. To get even more specific with just how dominant he was in the UFC, we're gonna put some numbers back into it. So he fought 13 times in the UFC, and out of those 13 fights, he lost 2 rounds. And the 2 rounds he lost were the 3rd round against Conor McGregor. He did lose that round. Conor McGregor was outstriking him. And then it was the 1st round against Justin Gaethje, and that one's a little up in the air. It was kind of questionable that he lost that round, but regardless, 2 rounds in 13 fights in the UFC. That's pretty wild. You don't see that ever. John Jones has lost rounds. John Jones has arguably lost fights in the UFC. And my personal favorite stat with Khabib is that he's never bled. He's never bled. So on top of him not even being dropped, of course with that, he's never been cut in an MMA fight. That's just crazy. That's the craziest accomplishment. This guy took barely any damage ever in his UFC career. And then with Khabib, the reason why he was so dominant is because he's the greatest grappler we have ever seen in mixed martial arts history. And of course, after he choked out Justin Gaethje in his last UFC fight, he retired as the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. With being a champion, that is the next thing, the next greatest accomplishment that a UFC fighter could accomplish, and that's being the best fighter in the world pound for pound, and Khabib accomplished that as well. So next up, we got to talk about the level of competition that Khabib Nurmagomedov's faced, because if you go 13-0 in your MMA career, who are you fighting to go 13-0? Like, was this guy facing trash cans? We all know that that's not the case whatsoever, because the notable wins in Khabib Nurmagomedov's career is Justin Gaethje, who's a former interim champ, Dustin Poirier, who's a former interim champ, Conor McGregor, a former double UFC champ. And when he fought Conor McGregor, that was the highest pay-per-view in UFC history as well. With everything Khabib has accomplished, there are a lot of question marks in Khabib's UFC career, which is why I was so intrigued to make this video. The biggest one with Khabib is that he arguably lost the Gleison Tebow. It was a very, very close fight. I believe if you look at the stats, I think they're in favor of Gleison Tebow, if I can remember correctly. But at the end of the day, it's a win on his UFC record, so we can't dwell on that too much. And then probably the second thing that gets brought up the most when we're talking about downsides for Khabib's UFC career is that he retired in his prime. I think he was like 32 years old, 31 years old when he retired against Justin Gaethje. With that, there's downsides. We gotta be clear about this. There's a lot of downsides with that because there's a lot of matchups that didn't happen. Would Khabib have a loss on his record by now if he was fighting? I would not bet for that, but you just don't know. Because he also retired in his prime, he left a lot of matchups at heavier weight classes. Like, he could have fought at welterweight. He could have fought Tyron Woodley and become a double champ. And then another thing is that he's pulled out of multiple fights. The biggest one that I will mention that is very suspicious and just not a good look is when he pulled out against Tony Ferguson at 209 because of his weight cut, which led to him getting hospitalized. And we all know that Khabib on that fight week, he was eating tiramisu during fight week when he was supposed to be cutting weight. As he was cutting weight, he's eating dessert. And then it led to him getting hospitalized because of his weight cut. So it's just not a good look.
It's tiramisu time, mother.
Okay, now we're gonna get onto the man in today's UFC right now, and it's Alex Pereira. So Alex Pereira, his greatest accomplishment is, of course, he's a multi-divisional UFC champion. He won the middleweight championship against Israel Adesanya, and he also won the UFC light heavyweight championship against Jiří Procházka. But the thing that's even more impressive of the fact that he's become a multi-divisional UFC champion is the fact that he did it so quickly. So to become a UFC middleweight champion, he did that in just under a year. To become a two-division UFC champion, he did that in just over 2 years, and that's unheard of. And he did that at 37 years of age, and he did this with only 13 professional fights in his entire MMA career. And Alex Pereira's UFC record is 7 wins and 1 loss. And out of his 7 wins, he has 5 finishes and 2 decisions, and that equates to a 71% finish win. We all know Alex Pereira, he knocks the shit out of everyone he fights. If you go to a decision with him, you said the right prayer that night. And another great accomplishment of just Alex Pereira's career is the fact that he's been so active the moment he entered the octagon and in the UFC. He's fighting at least 3 times a year. He's a very active champion. He saved multiple UFC cards. He took the UFC 300 main event on short notice, but then he took the UFC 303 main event on even shorter notice, 15 days. He saved that card for MMA fans, and that's why he's such a fan favorite, because of his fighting style, his personality, and also the fact that he is willing to step up when he's called upon from Dana White. And we talked about how dominant Khabib was in his grappling. You could say the exact same thing for Alex Pereira with his kickboxing, with his overall striking. He's the greatest kickboxer probably on earth that we've ever seen. But when we're talking about the UFC, he's probably one of the best strikers we've ever seen in UFC history. He is pound for pound, he's got to be like the most powerful striker we've ever seen in the world. In my opinion, he's the biggest superstar in the UFC right now. And the crazy part about that is he doesn't even speak English. But with all that being said as well, Alex Pereira, a lot of downsides in his UFC career. Doesn't seem like that, but I broke it down, and you're about to find out. First and foremost, he got flatlined against Israel Adesanya. And then also we have to mention that he won a split decision over Jan Blachowicz. Jan Blachowicz, former light heavyweight champion for sure, great fighter, but he was also 40 years old when he took him to a split decision. I think Alex Pereira definitely won that fight, and the reason it's almost like a downside to his UFC career is the fact that just people are using that as like an argument. People thought he actually lost that fight. And then this next one is a very interesting one. So a lot of people also say that he's just had favorable matchups ever since he entered the UFC. But you got to look at the level of opposition that Alex Pereira has faced. Since he entered the UFC, these are his most notable wins. Israel Adesanya, like I mentioned, one of the greatest middleweight champions we've ever seen of all time. Sean Strickland, former middleweight champion. Jan Blachowicz, former light heavyweight champion. Jiří Procházka, twice knocked him out, former light heavyweight world champion. Oh, did I mention he knocked out Israel Adesanya? Did I mention he knocked out Sean Strickland? Did I mention he knocked out Jamal Hill, who's also another former light heavyweight world champion? And that was at UFC 300, one of the greatest UFC events of all time, headlined that. So out of the 8 fights he's had in the UFC, he's fought 5 former world champions. That's no easy thing to do. Favorable matchups, whatever, that was just the way the divisions were laid out. Right after Alex Pereira's last fight, initially I was saying Alex Pereira for sure. In the 2-division champion, defended the belt multiple times. I don't even think I said that. Basically, when I originally was thinking of this, who I was gonna say is the most accomplished in their MMA career, initially I was thinking Alex Pereira for sure because of the multiple division championships, defending the belt, and everything in between. But when I really thought about it, I'm like, I think it has to be Khabib. Khabib, he's defended the belt 3 times. He's the most dominant fighter we've ever seen. He's never bled. He's never been hurt. I gotta give it to Khabib. But with that, if Alex Pereira moves up to heavyweight and becomes a simultaneous light heavyweight champion and heavyweight champion, as well as being a former middleweight champion, so a 3-division UFC champion, it's a wash. Alex Pereira is definitely the most accomplished fighter compared to Khabib. And is he arguably the greatest fighter of all time? No, I don't think so. I think he's probably the most accomplished. I don't even know. Is he? Can you say he's the GOAT more than Jon Jones? Can you say he's more accomplished more than Jon Jones? No one's done it before. That's why it's crazy. You know what I mean? Damn, I don't know. But I got Khabib for now. But if Alex Pereira wins the heavyweight championship and beats Jon Jones, can you imagine? There's no way. But yeah, Khabib. I'll just say that.